I held Ash's lead rope tighter, though Ash stood calm, ears flicking but not pinned. "He's not dangerous," I said firmly. "He just needed a chance." Harker's eyes narrowed. "Chances get people hurt. I got the handlers, the facilities. That horse belongs with professionals, not with children." Before I could speak, my grandfather cut in. "We manage our own, Harker. Always have." Harker's lips thinned. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Animals with records don't just disappear, miss. The county keeps notes. If he hurts someone again, they'll take him, no matter what you think you've earned." His boots clicked against the gravel as he walked back to his truck. "Nice animal, though," he called over his shoulder. "Shame what'll happen when he snaps." When the dust of his tires settled, I stood by the fence, shaking. Anger bubbled under my skin. My grandfather rested a hand on my shoulder. "Don't let him inside your head," he said softly. I shook my head. "It's not about him. Ash deserves better than a life of fear." That night, I sat with Ash under the stars. He grazed near the fence, calm despite the shadow Harker left behind. I whispered, "They don't know you. But I do." Ash lifted his head, ears forward, and for the first time he stepped close enough that his muzzle brushed my cheek. My heart raced, not with fear but with something stronger, trust. I thought the storm had passed, but Harker's visit was only the first crack of thunder. Trouble was already rolling toward us, and it would not stop at words. The trouble came sooner than I expected. A week later, while I was mucking out the barn, the old rotary phone rang inside the kitchen. My grandfather's voice grew tight as he listened, and when he came out, his face looked carved from stone. "That was animal control," he said. My heart dropped. "What about Ash?" "Not yet," he answered, "but there's been a formal complaint. Multiple ones. They claim he's dangerous. They're sending someone out to inspect the property." I dropped the pitchfork. "That's a lie. I filled out every form. I followed every rule." He rubbed the back of his neck, jaw set. "Doesn't matter if it's a lie. If a man with enough money and the right name wants trouble, he'll make it." I knew then whose shadow stretched over us. "Harker," I whispered. He only nodded. That whole day I worked like a soldier before battle. I scrubbed the water trough, mended the gate latch, laid out every paper and vet record in a neat folder. Ash watched me from the corral, ears flicking at my restless steps. He could feel the unease. "They won't take you," I told him, pressing my forehead to the rail. "Not after how far we've come." The next morning the inspector arrived with a clipboard, polite but stiff. He walked the property, asked sharp questions, jotted notes. I showed him everything, the feeding logs, the training records, even the scratches in my notebook where I had marked each inch of progress. Ash stood still for the exam, even lifted his hoof on command. The inspector's face never softened. 2 days later the letter came in the mail. My hands shook as I opened it. Notice of review. Temporary suspension of custody. I read the words 3 times but they didn't change. "They're coming for him," I whispered. My grandfather scanned the page, lips pressed tight. "They want him moved to a holding facility until the review is done. Which means he goes back into the system." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. "He'll shut down again. He'll think we left him. He won't survive it." My grandfather looked at me long, then said, "If you mean to keep him, you'd better be ready to fight." That night I lay awake, the letter burning in my mind. Outside, Ash shifted in the corral, restless too. Somewhere deep inside me a spark caught fire. I would not let them take him, not without a battle. I woke before the sun, a plan already forming in my head. If Harker wanted to twist Ash's story, I would tell the truth louder. By breakfast I had flyers stacked on the table, the printer still warm. My grandfather raised a brow as he sipped his coffee. "You're taking this to the town?" I nodded. "To anyone who will listen. They need to see who Ash really is." That day I walked into the feed store with trembling hands but steady voice. I pinned a flyer on the board showing Ash's picture and the words, "Not dangerous. Just misunderstood." I told the clerk about his progress, how he let me halter him now, how he nickered when I came to the fence. The clerk softened. "Never thought I'd hear that about lot 129. I carried the story to the vet clinic, the school, the post office. At night, I posted pictures online. Ash's dark head leaning gently into my shoulder, his scars visible but his eyes calm. To my surprise, the post spread. Messages poured in. A retired soldier wrote, "He reminds me of the men who came back from war, scarred but still here." A mother shared, "My son has trauma too. If your horse can heal, maybe he can as well." But the louder I spoke, the louder Harker fought back. The local paper ran his statement. A naive girl endangering her community. He called Ash a ticking bomb, twisting every fact he could. People argued in grocery aisles, some saying I was reckless, others calling me brave. One morning a photographer came to the ranch. He captured the moment Ash pressed his forehead to mine, the sunrise painting us in pink light. That photo traveled further than I could have dreamed. Strangers sent letters, drawings, even donations for Ash's care. My grandfather shook his head in wonder. "You've stirred up a storm, Clara?" I answered quietly, "He deserves the whole world to know he's more than a monster." Still, doubt crept in at night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Harker's words, "Shame what'll happen when he snaps." Each time, I pushed the fear down and whispered into the dark, "I'm not leaving you, Ash." And each morning, Ash met me at the fence as if to answer back. The county set a hearing date. My stomach turned at the thought of it, rooms with officials, papers, and laws. I wasn't a lawyer. I was just a girl with a horse. But I knew one thing, the truth was ours and we would carry it together. The day of the hearing arrived with heavy skies. My grandfather drove us into town, his silence pressed thick against the hum of the old truck. I clutched the folder of papers in my lap, vet records, feeding logs, every scrap of proof I could gather. My palms sweated so badly I left damp marks on the cover. "Clara," my grandfather said at a stoplight, "this isn't about out-talking lawyers. It's about showing them the truth. Don't forget that." I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to speak. The county building smelled of old paper and disinfectant. Inside the hearing room, people filled every seat. Neighbors, ranchers, strangers who had seen the photo of Ash online. At the front sat the board. 3 officials, serious faces lined with fatigue. Across from us, Toby Harker leaned back in a crisp suit, his lawyer flipping pages like he was dealing cards. Harker's smirk was thin and sharp. Untamable horses sold at auction, but what the girl did left everyone in total shock. People said the auction ring had seen every kind of mistake, but they had not seen a girl raise her hand for the horse everyone feared. Dust floated like smoke, boots scraped metal rails, and voices ran together like water. By the time the hammer fell, no one laughed. They stared. Because the girl did something no adult dared to try, and what followed changed more than one life that day. The morning heat had already pressed the ground flat. I stood with my grandfather at the back rail. "Keep your hands in your pockets," he said. "This place eats feelings." Lot 129 waited in the far pen, black as wet stone, taller than the rest, eyes bright with old storms. A handler rattled a chain and jumped away. "He broke a man's ribs last month," someone said. Another voice answered, "Better to put him down." The words slid under my skin and stayed there. When they rolled the gate, the stallion burst into the ring and slammed the fence. People flinched and swore. The auctioneer tried to sound brave. "Lot 129. Who dares?" Bids died before they were born. I felt my grandfather's fingers close on my sleeve. "Clara, don't," he whispered. The horse stopped, only for a breath, and looked at me. He did not blink. It felt like he asked a question that only I could hear. My chest hurt with it. I raised my hand. "Sold for 100 to the girl in the braid," the auctioneer said, half laughing, half relieved. The rail buzzed. "Foolish. Brave. Where's her father?" I walked down the steps on shaking legs and met the stallion's stare again. "I have you now," I breathed, though my voice sounded small. Outside, the handler shoved a paper at us. "No returns," he warned. "If he breaks your trailer, that's on you." My grandfather signed slow. "We will manage," he said, though his voice shook too. We lined boards, poured a thin trail of grain, and waited. A man in a clean jacket watched from a truck window, smiling without his eyes. He spoke just loud enough. "That one ruins people," he said. "And he never forgets." The stallion stamped once, then followed me up the ramp as if he had heard and did not agree. At the top, he stopped, turned his head, and let his breath warm my cheek. My grandfather whispered, "What did you just do?" I did not answer because I did not know yet, only that the horse had chosen to move when I did. The trailer rattled all the way home, and every bump made the stallion throw his weight against the boards. My grandfather's knuckles whitened on the wheel, his mouth pressed in a hard line. "Clara, you've tied our roof to a storm," he muttered. I sat in the bed of the truck, eyes fixed on the slats where the stallion's dark shape moved like thunderclouds. Each crash shook me, but I stayed, whispering through the gaps, "You're safe now, you're safe." He stilled for seconds at a time, as if listening. At the ranch, we opened the gate with boards held high like shields. The horse charged down the ramp, circling the corral, breath steaming in the cold dusk. He tested every fence line, eyes wild, hooves striking sparks. My grandfather passed me a mug of tea, shaking his head. That animal will break bones before he breaks a habit. I didn't answer. My chest hurt from the way he looked at me in the ring. It wasn't madness, it was pain wrapped in anger. That night when the house went quiet, I slipped out. The corral stood silver under the moon. He waited in the far corner, muscles coiled. I climbed the fence and sat still, saying nothing. An hour passed. The air cut through my coat, but I stayed. He finally turned, eyes glowing in the dim light, and watched me. For the first time, he didn't rear or charge. He simply breathed, slow and heavy. "I won't leave," I whispered. "Not ever." His ears flicked forward. He lowered his body, lying in the dirt. Not near me, but close enough to show that he had listened. When dawn came, I carried slices of apple in my pocket. My grandfather warned, "Don't go near him, Clara." I nodded, but I walked anyway, placing the fruit on the ground and stepping back. The stallion sniffed, hesitated, then ate piece by piece. I watched from the rail, hardly breathing. My grandfather stood behind me, arms folded, but his eyes softened. "Tiny, terrifying progress," he murmured. I smiled. "His name is Ash," I said quietly. "Not because he's black. Because he looks like fire that almost burned out, but still glows." Ash lifted his head, apple juice dripping from his muzzle, and looked at me again. Days turned into a rhythm I carried in my bones. Each morning before the rooster crowed, I slipped on my boots and walked to the corral. Ash stood like a sentinel, his breath clouding the cold air. I never rushed him. I crouched low, leaving space between us, letting him decide. Sometimes he only watched. Other times he stepped forward, a single hoof at a time, testing me like a puzzle. My grandfather leaned on the fence, coffee in hand. "You're betting your heart on a wild card," he said one morning. I kept my eyes on Ash. "Maybe. But he's worth the risk." By the 5th day, I hung a halter on the fence. Not to trap him, just to show him it wouldn't bite. He circled it, snorted, even stomped once, but he didn't bolt. "That's something," I whispered. My grandfather chuckled dryly. "You two are stubborn in the same way." I smiled, remembering a picture of my mother, young, laughing, holding me on her hip before sickness took her. That memory ached like an old wound, but I felt it was tied to why Ash mattered so much. Progress came in inches. The first time his nose brushed my sleeve, I froze, afraid even to breathe. Then he stepped back, tossing his head, but I could see it, the choice he made not to strike. That night I wrote in my notebook, "First touch. Fragile as glass." But word spread in town. At the feed store, I overheard whispers. "That girl's gonna get herself killed." Another voice added, "Harker tried to buy that horse once. Dangerous as sin." My grandfather heard too, and his face tightened. That evening he said, "Clara, men like Toby Harker don't let go of what they want." I frowned. "Ash isn't for sale." He nodded, but his eyes stayed troubled. The next morning, Ash met me at the fence without fear. He even let me run my fingers along his scarred neck for a breath before pulling away. My chest swelled with hope. I whispered, "Good boy, Ash. You don't have to be afraid anymore." My grandfather stood silent behind me, but later I caught him wiping the corner of his eye. I thought the hardest part was teaching Ash to trust. But the real fight was just beginning, and it had nothing to do with ropes or saddles. The sun burned low the afternoon he arrived. A truck rolled up our dirt drive, too shiny for country roads. A man stepped out in polished boots, jacket pressed sharp. He carried himself like someone used to getting his way. "Name's Toby Harker," he said, tipping his hat toward me, though his smile never reached his eyes. "I heard you've got one of the Bureau's problem horses. Thought I'd take a look." My grandfather came out of the barn, jaw set. "He's not for sale." Harker laughed, thin and practiced. "Didn't say I was buying. Just checking. That kind of animal's dangerous, little lady. You let him near you long enough, he'll remind you what wild really means." But peace never lasted long. Rumors still swirled. At the cafe in town, I overheard men muttering, "That horse will turn one day. Wild never changes." Others defended me, voices sharp. "You didn't see her in that hearing. She earned him." Every word reached me, carried home like stones in my pockets. One morning, a letter arrived, stamped with the county seal. My hands shook as I opened it. This time it wasn't a complaint. It was an invitation. They wanted Ash and me to visit a nearby school, part of a program for children with learning difficulties. "They want him to help," I said aloud, astonished. My grandfather studied the page, then looked at Ash through the window. Maybe that's what he was meant for all along. The day of the visit, I led Ash into the schoolyard, his steps careful on the pavement. Children gathered, eyes wide. One boy, who hadn't spoken all year according to his teacher, reached out a trembling hand. Ash lowered his head, letting the boy's fingers brush his muzzle. The boy whispered, so soft I barely heard, "Good horse." Gasps rose around us and tears filled the teacher's eyes. That night I wrote in my notebook, "He isn't a trophy. He's a healer." Ash stood by the fence, moonlight catching the plaque with his name. I leaned against his shoulder, breathing the warm, steady scent of him. For the first time in months I felt not just relief but purpose. Still, in the back of my mind, a shadow lingered, the kind that wears polished boots and doesn't forgive defeat. The shadow returned in the heat of August. A truck idled at the edge of our drive, dust curling in its wake. Toby Harker stepped out, that same pressed jacket, but this time his smile was gone. "You think one hearing ends it?" he said, voice sharp as gravel. "You've embarrassed me, girl. And men like me don't forget." My grandfather stepped between us, his voice iron. "This is our land, Harker. Leave." But Harker only leaned closer, lowering his tone. "You think you saved that horse? All you did was paint a target on his back. When he stumbles, and he will, no board will protect you next time." His eyes flicked toward Ash, who stood calm by the fence, ears pricked as though he understood. Then Harker turned and left, the truck spitting dust as it disappeared down the road. I clenched the rail until my knuckles ached. "He won't stop," I whispered. My grandfather laid a hand on mine. "Let him stew. Truth has a way of outlasting men like that. Still, fear not at me." Every time Ash shied at a rabbit or snorted at a sudden noise, I saw Harker's smirk in my mind. But each time Ash settled, looking to me for steadiness. It was as if he told me, "If you don't give up, neither will I." Weeks passed, and the fear dulled into a quieter resolve. Together, Ash and I kept working, leading him over bridges, across streams, into crowds. Each challenge he met, not with panic but with trust. At night, I reread my mother's letter. "Find someone worth waiting for. Hold on with both hands." And I held tighter. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, children gathered again at the ranch. They read aloud by the fence, voices stumbling but proud. Ash stood still for each word, head lowered as though he listened. A little girl finished her story and looked at me, smiling. "He's not scary," she said. "He's gentle." I stroked Ash's neck, feeling the steady warmth of him. "Yes," I said softly. "He just needed someone to believe it first." Harker's threat still echoed, but as I watched Ash nuzzle the children, I knew something he didn't. This horse wasn't mine alone anymore. He belonged to everyone who needed proof that the broken could become whole. Winter came, soft and quiet, laying its weight across the ranch. Snow dusted Ash's back like sugar, and he shook it off with a snort that made the children laugh. Life had found a new rhythm, mornings filled with trust exercises, afternoons with visitors who came not to see a wild horse tamed, but to witness hope alive in flesh and bone. One evening, as I brushed Ash's mane, my grandfather walked up with a small box in his hands. "Found this in your mother's things," he said, voice low. Inside was a letter, folded carefully, the ink faded but strong. My hands trembled as I read, "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, I hope you found someone wild and wonderful, someone worth waiting for. If so, hold on with both hands. Love always, Mom." Tears blurred the words. I pressed the letter to my heart and turned to Ash, who stood steady beside me. "I did, Mom," I whispered. "I really did." Ash lowered his head, pressing his muzzle to my shoulder as though sealing the promise. Harker never came back, at least not in person. His voice lingered in town, but it no longer mattered. The world had seen Ash for what he was. Not a monster, not a danger, but a survivor. Strangers still sent letters and drawings. The plaque on the fence caught the winter light each morning, its words etched into more than wood. Ash stood when he could have run. And so did I. The months that followed were quiet, but not empty. Ash became more than a horse. He was a lesson, standing tall in every scar, breathing proof that patience can mend what anger once shattered. Children leaned on his side to find courage. Neighbors who once doubted now nodded with respect. And I, who had walked into an auction with nothing but stubborn hope, found myself remade. Because trust, I learned, isn't about fixing what is broken. It's about standing beside it day after day until it believes again. Moral lesson. The wildest hearts are not won by force but by patience, love, and faith. What others call impossible may only be waiting for someone who refuses to give up. Ash taught me this. Healing is slow, but once trust takes root, it can outlast every storm. The testimonies began. A vet I barely knew spoke first, describing Ash's transformation as remarkable progress. a case of patience meeting resilience. My grandfather followed, voice rough but steady. That horse gave my granddaughter something back. You take him now, you break more than an animal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then Harker's lawyer rose, words smooth as polished glass. He spoke of liability, danger, county responsibility. An emotional child, he said, cannot be the sole measure of public safety. His sentences dripped with authority, and for a moment, I felt the room tilting against me. When it was my turn, my legs trembled, but I forced myself to stand. My voice cracked at first, but steadied as I met each board member's eyes. I didn't save Ash, I said. He saved me. After my mom died, I thought everything I touched fell apart. But Ash didn't need someone perfect. He needed someone who wouldn't give up. And I stayed. I'll always stay. Not because I want to win a case, but because he finally knows what it feels like to be safe. The room went still. Even Harker's smirk faltered. The board recessed to deliberate. I walked out into the gray air, clutching my grandfather's hand so tightly it hurt. We waited on the courthouse steps, time dragging like wet rope. People stopped to offer quiet nods, whispers of encouragement. But my heart hammered with only one thought: would they take him from me? When the doors opened again, my chest locked. It was time to hear the verdict. The board filed back into the room, their faces unreadable. I held my breath as the lead member, a woman with graying hair pulled tight, cleared her throat. Papers rustled in her hand, but her voice was steady. In consideration of all evidence and testimony, the board finds insufficient cause to remove the animal known as Ash from his current owner's care. Custody is fully reinstated. For a moment I couldn't move. The words floated like they weren't real. Then the air rushed out of me and my knees gave way. My grandfather caught my arm, steadying me. The room erupted, some clapping, others murmuring, but all I heard was the thundering in my chest. Across the aisle, Harker stood stiff, jaw tight, his lawyer whispering something sharp in his ear. He didn't look at me as he stormed out, boots striking the floor like gunfire. But I saw enough in his face to know this wasn't the last of him. Outside on the courthouse lawn, the tension I had carried for weeks broke loose. Tears spilled hot and fast, and I sank onto the grass, pressing my hands to my face. My grandfather knelt beside me, his arm around my shoulders. "You did it," he whispered. "You held your ground." Back at the ranch, the sunset painted the fields in gold. Ash waited at the gate, ears pricked, eyes bright. When I stepped toward him, he pressed his forehead into my chest and closed his eyes. I buried my face in his mane, breathing in the earthy scent of dust and grass. "We're safe," I whispered. "We're really safe." That night, my grandfather poured 2 glasses of cider, raising one with a weary smile. To second chances. I clinked mine softly against his. To never giving up. Ash snorted from the corral as if echoing our toast. The following days felt lighter. I walked Ash through shallow streams, brushed the scars along his flank, even let schoolchildren read to him by the fence. He lowered his head to listen, standing still as if their small voices mattered most. For the first time since I'd seen him in the auction ring, his eyes no longer looked like storms. They looked like skies after rain, still wild but open. I thought the fight was finished. But sometimes victories are only the beginning of new tests. And I would learn that Ash's story and mine was far from over. Spring brought a rhythm of quiet work. Each morning, Ash met me at the fence, his low whinny greeting me before the sun fully rose. I brushed the dust from his coat, cleaned his hooves, and walked him slowly around the corral. Step by step, trust settled between us like roots finding soil. My grandfather often watched from the porch, arms folded, but I caught the hint of pride in his eyes. One afternoon, I laid a saddle across Ash's back for the first time. I didn't cinch it, just let the leather rest there. He flinched, muscles twitching, but he didn't explode. I whispered, "It's only a feeling, Ash. Nothing more." He stood, ears swiveling, until finally he exhaled long and steady. My grandfather muttered, "Never thought I'd see that." I smiled faintly. Neither did I. But progress carried weight. The more Ash learned, the more I wondered what he was meant for. Not races, his old injury kept him from running hard. Not shows, he wasn't the kind to prance for applause. Maybe he was meant for something quieter, something most people overlooked. News traveled again faster than I could stop it. A neighbor stopped me at the market. "Heard you're riding that wild stallion already? Dangerous business." Another chimed in, "Or maybe she's got the gift. Some horses choose their people." Their words followed me home, each one either doubt or hope. Then came the package, unmarked, left on our porch. Inside was a wooden plaque, iron letters carved deep. Ash stood when he could have run. A note lay folded beside it. You taught me what patience can do. Keep going. My hands shook as I read it aloud to my grandfather. He stared at the plaque for a long moment before saying, You've turned strangers into believers, Clara. That's not a small thing. I mounted the plaque on the fence post where the morning light touched it first. Each day as I let Ash out, it gleamed like a promise. But promises come with tests. Not long after, my grandfather handed me a worn envelope he had found in a box of my mother's things. Inside was a letter in her handwriting. My dearest Clara, I hope you find someone who makes your heart steady, someone wild and worth waiting for. Hold on with both hands. I pressed the paper to my chest, tears blurring the words. Looking at Ash grazing nearby, I whispered, I did, Mom. I really did. Summer stretched long and warm, the fields buzzing with cicadas as Ash and I settled into a life that felt almost ordinary. Each day, I added small steps, leading him farther from the corral, letting children stroke his nose, guiding him across creeks that once would have sent him rearing. He surprised me with his patience, his willingness to trust after all the scars he carried. One evening, I slipped onto his back without reins, without stirrups, just my hands resting light on his neck. For a heartbeat he froze. Then, instead of fighting, he stood solid beneath me, his breath deep and even. My grandfather leaned against the barn, arms crossed, but I saw the corner of his mouth curve. Looks like he decided you're his, he said. My throat tightened. Or maybe I'm his.